Envoy Talvin adjusted the collar of his formal robe, the fabric whispering against his scaled skin like a distant wind on his homeworld's arid plains. The grand chamber of the United Galactic Assembly hummed with a symphony of alien voices, each one echoing off the crystalline walls that curved upward into a dome, simulating the void of space. Stars twinkled artificially overhead, a holographic projection meant to inspire unity among the diverse species gathered here in the year 3750. But to Talvin, it felt like a fragile illusion, one that could shatter at any moment under the weight of interstellar politics. He stood at his podium on the outer ring, representing the nervous outer colonies, worlds like his own, Zethra Prime, where resources were scarce, and threats from rogue nebulae pirates loomed like shadows in the night. Talvin was a male of middle cycles, his emerald scales dulled by years of diplomatic skirmishes, his three eyes scanning the room with a mix of caution and quiet resolve. He had been chosen for this role not because of his eloquence, but for his unyielding honesty, a trait rare in these halls where words were weapons wrapped in silk. The assembly was in full session, delegates from core worlds and fringe systems alike debating the latest treaty on resource allocation. The air carried scents of exotic spices from the Vexari delegation's incense burners and the metallic tang of the robotic envoys from the Makari collective. Talvin's thoughts drifted to his family back home, his mate and younglings huddled in their burrow, praying to the ancient stars for protection. He wasn't deeply religious, but in moments like this, he felt a subtle pull, as if the universe itself whispered assurances of order amid the chaos. "Order, please," boomed the voice of the presiding chancellor, a towering being from the Eldari race, its tentacles gesturing for silence. We now turn to the matter of the human delegation's arrival. They were scheduled to present their petition for full membership hours ago. This delay is unbecoming. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Talvin leaned forward, his clawed hands gripping the podium's edge. Humans, those enigmatic bipeds from the Sol system, had only recently emerged on the galactic stage. Whispers spoke of their rapid advancement, born from a history of internal wars and near extinctions. They were survivors, much like his own people, but with a fire that burned brighter, fueled by something intangible. Talvin had studied their archives, tales of exploration, innovation, and a stubborn refusal to yield. It intrigued him, this human spirit, as they called it. A snide chuckle came from the Korvath delegate nearby, a bulbous creature with glowing veins pulsing under translucent skin. Typical of the primitives, it hissed, its voice amplified through a translator. They crawl out of their backwater system and think they can waltz into our summit fashionably late. Perhaps their ships broke down again, rusty relics from their stone age. Laughter erupted from several pods, the sound grating on Talvin's nerves. He felt a flicker of empathy for the absent humans. His colonies had faced similar mockery when they first petitioned for aid against the pirate incursions. Delayed arrival, another delegate sneered, a feathered avian from the ethery flock, more like afraid to show their faces. What do they bring to the table? Trinkets and tales of their democracy. Talvin remained silent, but inside, a storm brewed. He remembered the holovids of human history he'd reviewed en route, their moon landings, their space stations, their leaps into warp technology despite devastating pandemics and climate collapses. They weren't just survivors, they were creators, turning despair into defiance. If the rumors were true, their latest innovations could tip the balance in the ongoing border disputes. The Chancellor raised a tentacle. We shall proceed without them if necessary, but let us not forget the protocol. Humanity's envoy was to unveil their contribution to the Alliance, a vessel, I believe, meant to bolster our defenses against the Void Swarm. More scoffs. Talvin's mind wandered to a quiet moment from his journey here. Alone in his quarters, he'd gazed at the stars streaking by and whispered a prayer his grandmother taught him. In the vastness, guide us, unseen architect. It wasn't directed at any deity he could name, but the words brought comfort, a sense that the cosmos wasn't random cruelty but a tapestry with purpose. Suddenly, a low tremor vibrated through the platform. The orbiting station, a colossal ring encircling the neutral planet of Harmonia, shuddered faintly. Delegates exchanged uneasy glances. Structural anomaly, someone muttered. Talvin felt it in his bones, a deep rumble like the approach of a sandstorm on Zethra. His scales prickled. The holographic stars above flickered, and alarms blared softly before being silenced by the technicians. Calm yourselves, the Chancellor urged. Likely a passing asteroid field, but the tremors grew rhythmic now like footsteps of a giant in the void. Talvin's heart raced. He thought of his younglings again, their innocent eyes wide with wonder at stories of the stars. What if this was something more, the humans' delay? Could it be connected? Whispers turned to shouts as the platform's viewports polarized, revealing the blackness of space. Something massive eclipsed the distant sun, casting shadows across the assembly. Gasps filled the air. It's a ship, the Korvath delegate stammered. Talvin's eyes widened. Emerging from the warp fold was a behemoth, its hull gleaming like polished obsidian, adorned with lights that pulsed like a living heartbeat. dwarfed the nearby moons, its form elegant yet menacing, bristling with arrays that hinted at unimaginable power. The Titan-class Eidolon. He'd heard whispers of it in diplomatic briefs, but seeing it was like witnessing creation itself. The chamber fell silent, all replacing mockery. Talvin felt a chill, not of fear, but of revelation. In that moment, staring at the human marvel, he sensed something profound, an order to the universe, where the overlooked rose to redefine everything. And then the human envoy's voice echoed through the comms, calm and resolute. "Apologies for the delay. We prefer to be late and thorough." But as the ship loomed closer, Talvin noticed something anomalous, a faint glow along its underbelly, as if drawing energy from an unseen source. What secrets did it hold? The tremors intensified, and in the hush, Talvin whispered to himself, "This can't just be coincidence." Talvin felt the tremor roll through the deck plates like a slow heartbeat, deep and deliberate, as though the station itself had taken a breath and decided to hold it. Every delegate in the vast circular chamber felt it too. Conversations died mid-syllable, tentacles froze mid-gesture, feathers flattened against scaled necks. The holographic starfield overhead flickered once, twice, then steadied, but the illusion of calm was already broken. Outside the crystalline viewports, the Eidolon hung in the void like a continent forged of night and fire. Its silhouette blotted out entire constellations. Talvin's middle eye, the one tuned for infrared, caught the heat bloom along its spine, engines the size of cities idling with the patience of sleeping gods. The ship was not merely large. It was a statement written in steel and starlight, and every line of it said, "We were afraid once. Look what fear taught us." The Chancellor's tentacles curled tight against its body, a gesture Talvin recognized as the Eldari equivalent of clenching fists. "Human vessel," the Chancellor intoned, voice reverberating through 1,000 translators. "You have entered restricted orbital space without clearance. Explain yourself." A new hologram blossomed at the chamber's heart. The man who appeared was not what Talvin had expected. Captain Elias Thorne was broad across the shoulders, yes, but there was weariness in the set of his jaw and silver threading the dark hair at his temples. His uniform was immaculate, yet the left sleeve bore a faint scorch mark that had never quite been cleaned away, a scar in fabric. His eyes, storm gray and unreadable, swept the assembly as though counting heartbeats. "Chancellor, honored delegates," Thorne began, voice low but carrying like a cello note in cathedral silence. "My name is Elias Thorne, commanding officer of the UEF Eidolon. We apologize for the unannounced arrival. Calibration of the dark energy lattice took longer than projected. We do not come late out of disrespect. We come late because we refuse to come half-ready." A ripple of uneasy laughter from the core world delegates. The Korvath ambassador's bioluminescent veins flared an indignant violet. "Half-ready," it gurgled. "Your species is still burning fossil sludge on its birth world while we mastered fusion before your oceans cooled. And you lecture us on readiness." Thorne's mouth curved, not quite a smile. "We burned a lot of things getting here, Ambassador. Coal, cities, entire centuries of complacency. Turns out fire is an excellent teacher." Talvin felt the words land in his chest like stones dropped into still water. He thought of Zethra's dust-choked skies, the refugee convoys he had guided through pirate blockades, the way his mate had whispered ancient prayers over their eggs while raiders burned the horizon. Fire had taught his people too. They had simply never built anything this beautiful from the ashes. The platform shuddered again, stronger this time. A glass of Vexari spice water toppled, shattering in musical slow motion. Somewhere a child delegate from the Lorani pods began to cry, a thin, reedy sound that cut straight to Talvin's hearts. Thorne's gaze flicked to the sensor readouts floating beside his hologram. His expression did not change, but something shifted behind his eyes, the way a man looks when he hears an old song he thought he'd forgot. "Chancellor," he said quietly, "permission to drop the formalities. We have a problem." The main viewport polarized, enhancing contrast. Beyond the Eidolon's flank, space itself seemed to tear. A ragged wound of violet light yawned open, and from it poured the unmistakable signatures of the void swarm, bio-ships like blackened tumors, acid veins pulsing, maws yawning wide enough to swallow frigates whole. Dozens, hundreds, a tide of hunger that had devoured 17 systems in the last decade. Panic detonated. Delegates surged to their feet, security drones whirred into defensive patterns, the Chancellor's tentacles lashed in frantic semaphore. Talvin stayed seated, claws digging grooves into the podium. He had seen this before on smaller scales on colony monitors while families screamed. The swarm did not negotiate, it consumed. Only Thorne remained perfectly still. When he spoke again, his voice carried the same calm he might have used to order coffee. "Eidolon actual to fleet elements, stand by. All civilian channels clear the spectrum. We're going loud. The Korvath, you might want to sit down, this could get bright." Talvin's breath caught. There was no fleet. Every sensor in the sector showed only the Eidolon alone against the tide. The Korvath ambassador sputtered. "You intend to fight that armada with one ship?" "No," Thorne corrected gently. "I intend to end it with one ship." He turned his head slightly, as if listening to a voice no one else could hear. For an instant his eyes closed, lips moving in a soundless phrase Talvin could almost read. That will be done. Then the hologram's gaze snapped back to the chamber, fierce and protective. All stations, battle stations. Let's remind them why humanity stopped being afraid of the dark. The Eidolon's running lights dimmed to blood red. Along its flanks, ports irised open in perfect synchronization, revealing arrays that had no business existing outside theoretical physics. Talvin felt the station's artificial gravity waver as the Titan began to draw power on a scale that bent local spacetime. Inside his chest, something vast and quiet unfolded, an awareness older than language. He had prayed for deliverance many times, in burrows and in shuttles, and in the long nights when the stars felt too far away. Never had an answer arrived wearing human colors. The first lance of coherent dark energy speared out from the Eidolon's spine. It struck the lead swarm Leviathan dead center. There was no explosion, only a silent unraveling, as though the beam convinced the creature it had never existed in the first place. Debris that should have scattered simply ceased. The chamber was silent enough to hear heartbeats. Thorn's voice floated through the stunned hush, soft, almost conversational. "We didn't come to impress you. We came to protect you. Difference is, one of them matters." Another tremor rolled through the station, but this time it felt different, not fear, but the thunder of something turning in its sleep and choosing to stand guard. Talvin looked at the human captain's hologram, at the scorch mark on his sleeve, at the exhaustion and iron resolve fighting for space on his face, and felt something shift inside himself like tectonic plates finding new alignment. He whispered, without realizing he had spoken aloud, "Not luck." Someone wanted us to live long enough to see this. Outside the viewport, the Eidolon began to sing, a low, resonant hymn of engines and weapons and 10,000 human souls who had decided the universe would not end today. And somewhere in the dark between stars, the swarm began to scream. The scream of the void swarm was not sound. It was pressure, a psychic blade that scraped across every mind in the assembly. Delegates clutched skulls, antennae temples. The Lorani child delegate's cry pitched into a thin wail and then cut off as its mother folded protective membranes over it. Talvin's vision tripled, then tunneled, his three eyes watering as the hive mind's death agony flooded the chamber like black water. Only the human hologram stood untouched. Elias Thorn's jaw was set, but a muscle jumped beneath the stubble. A thin line of blood traced from his left nostril. The psychic backlash had reached even him through the link. He wiped it away with the back of his hand without looking, eyes never leaving the tactical sphere blooming beside him. "Swarm is broadcasting terror pulse on Theta band," he said, voice steady as bedrock. "Eidolon's dampeners are holding at 93%. You'll feel it, but it won't cook your brains. Probably." "Probably," the Corveth ambassador choked, veins flashing panicked crimson. Thorn allowed himself half a smile. "We're still stress testing the empathy lattice. Turns out weaponizing compassion has side effects." Talvin forced himself upright. The psychic pressure felt like drowning in tar, but beneath it something else pulsed, warm, defiant, almost musical. Human minds, thousands of them aboard the Titan, singing in counter-harmony. Not words, raw intent. "We are still here. You will not have them." He had never felt anything like it. On Zethra they sang laments when the raiders came. Humans sang battle hymns while the raiders were still burning. Outside the viewport, the battle unfolded in brutal ballet. The Eidolon carved impossible angles through the swarm tide, gravity drives flaring white-blue. Where other ships would bleed momentum in turns, the Titan simply decided physics was more of a guideline. Swarm bio-torpedoes, living missiles the size of corvettes, streaked toward it on columns of acid flame. The Eidolon's point defense grid answered with surgical grace. Rail slugs, plasma flakes, and something new, threads of silver light that wrapped the torpedoes like silk and unraveled them into glittering dust. Talvin's breath fogged the podium glass. Every instinct told him to run, to herd his people into evacuation pods, but his claws would not obey. He could not look away from the lone ship holding the line between Apocalypse and Tuesday afternoon. A new wave detached from the swarm fleet, needle-thin interceptors, faster than anything in known space, diving straight for the assembly platform. Straight for the delegates, straight for the children. The Chancellor's voice cracked. "They're targeting civilians. All defenses intercept. Negative," Thorn cut in, sharp as monomolecular blade. "Your guns will only feed them biomass. Stand down. We've got this." The Corvath laughed, a wet, hysterical sound. One ship against 1,000 needles." Thorn didn't answer with words. The Eidolon rolled, a motion so smooth it looked leisurely, and its ventral hangar irised open. From it poured a cloud of smaller craft, no larger than fighters, matte black, no running lights. They moved wrong, like birds made of shadow, accelerating to relativistic speeds in heartbeats. Talvin's middle eye caught the infrared bloom. Each drone carried a single human pilot. Thousands of volunteers, riding coffins of smart matter and prayer, launching themselves into the teeth of oblivion so the rest of the galaxy could finish its coffee. A soft, collective inhale rippled through the chamber. The drones met the needles in a storm of silent fire. Where they touched, reality stuttered. Some needles simply ceased, erased. Others veered off, confused, as though the hive mind had forgotten why it was angry. One drone took a direct hit, blossoming into a brief, terrible flower of light, and Talvin felt the absence like a snapped bone. On the bridge feed, a young woman's voice, calm, almost bored. Angel 6 is gone, adjusting for loss. Someone tell her mom she went out smiling. Talvin's throat closed. He thought of his own daughter, barely old enough to ride the sand winds, and felt something break open inside his chest. Awe, grief, gratitude too large for his body. Thorn's voice floated across the chaos, gentle now. Angel Wing, you are clear to execute Mercy Protocol. Copy actual. Mercy in 3-2, every drone still flying suddenly flared, not with weapons but with light, pure white, unbearably bright. The needles froze mid-flight, writhing as though burned from within. Then they began to fall away, drifting like dead leaves, the hive-mind connection severed. The psychic pressure vanished as though a door had slammed. Silence, stunned and absolute silence, filled the assembly. Talvin realized he was crying, not the dignified moisture of his species, but actual tears, hot and human, sliding down his scaled cheeks. Thorn looked straight into the pickup, and for a moment it felt as though he looked straight at Talvin. That was the empathy weaponry, version 1, he said quietly. We took the part of your minds that screams when you see something suffer, amplified it, and turned it into a blade. The swarm felt every death it ever caused, all at once. It's running now, it will keep running for a long time. The Corveth ambassador's veins had gone pale, almost translucent. You weaponized compassion. We weaponized truth, Thorn corrected. Compassion was just the delivery system. He paused, and when he spoke again his voice was raw. We lost 43 pilots buying you that truth. Their names will be read tonight in every human chapel, mosque, temple, and bar from here to Saul. Remember them when you vote on our membership. Talvin found himself on his feet without remembering standing. His claws trembled, but his voice did not. I vote yes, he said, the words scraping out like gravel. By the stars that guide us, by the eggs I have yet to see hatch, I vote yes. One by one, other delegates rose. The E3 flock bowed low, wings spread in surrender to wonder. Even Quartzara's crystalline form flickered in what might have been tears. Only the Chancellor remained seated, tentacles slowly unfurling its tentacles in the ancient Eldari gesture of deepest respect. Captain Thorn, it said, the United Galactic Assembly formally recognizes the sovereignty of humanity and extends full membership, effective immediately. Welcome to the table you just saved. Thorn inclined his head, exhaustion finally showing in the slump of his shoulders. Thank you, Chancellor. We'll try to be on time from now on. A ripple of weary laughter, the first normal sound in what felt like years. But Talvin's gaze had returned to the viewport. Beyond the drifting wreckage, deeper in the dark, something vast was moving. Not swarm, something older. Lights like cold blue eyes winked open in sequence, forming a silhouette larger than the Eidolon itself. Thorn saw it too. His face hardened again. Chancellor, he said softly, tell your people to keep the champagne on ice. Looks like the swarm was just the opening act. Talvin felt the temperature in the chamber drop 10 degrees as every screen filled with the new arrival. A single, impossibly ancient vessel, its hull etched with symbols no species in the assembly recognized, waking for the first time in 10,000 years. And from its heart, a voice older than language brushed across every mind and bone alike. We have watched the children of Earth. Now we would speak with them. Talvin's claws tightened until they bled. Somewhere in the dark, the real conversation was about to begin. The voice that spoke was not sound. It was gravity made audible, a pressure that folded itself into thoughts and memories, gentle as snowfall and heavy as neutron star crust. Every delegate felt it in the marrow of whatever they used for marrow. Talvin's knees buckled. The Corveth ambassador collapsed into its own gelatinous mass. Even the Makari drones stuttered mid-hover, their anti-grav fields flickering like candles in wind. We have watched the children of Earth. Now we would speak with them. The ancient ship filled every viewport now, a monolith of black glass and star-forged metal, longer than continents, its surface etched with grooves that hurt to perceive directly. It had no engines visible, no weapons, only those cold blue eyes of light opening one by one along its flanks that curved away into impossible distance. The Eidolon, for all its apocalyptic majesty, looked suddenly small, a wolf cub staring up at a sleeping dragon that had just opened one eye. Talvin's tongue felt thick, coated in dust older than his species. He tried to form words and failed. Around him, the chamber was a tableau of frozen terror and reverence. The Chancellor's tentacles hung limp, dripping ceremonial oils onto the marble. Only Elias Thorn moved. The hologram of the captain stepped forward until he stood at the very edge of the projection, boots planted as if on solid decking instead of light. Blood still traced from his nose, but his eyes were bright, almost feverish. Identify yourselves, he said. The words came out hoarse, yet carried the same calm authority he had used against the swarm. This is restricted space. State your intent. A pause that lasted 1,000 years and no time at all. Then the voice again, softer now, intimate, as though it spoke inside the skull rather than through the air. We are the architects. We seeded the garden. We return to measure the harvest. Talvin felt the words translate into images, vast gardens of nebulae, worlds blooming like flowers, species rising and falling across epochs. And threaded through all of it, quiet sorrow, the grief of a gardener who comes back after millennia and finds the orchard burning. Thorn's hands curled into fists at his sides. Measure how, with what scale? The blue lights pulsed once, almost affectionately. With mercy, with justice, with the fruit you have grown from fear. A beam of soft white light reached out from the ancient vessel, not a weapon but a caress. It touched the Eidolon's prow and flowed over the Titan like water. Every scar from the swarm battle glowed, then faded. Breaches sealed. The 43 empty drone cradles refilled with light that solidified into intact craft. Pilots who had been dead seconds ago opened their eyes on the hangar feed, gasping, laughing, weeping. Talvin heard a human woman's voice, broken and wondering. "Captain, I was gone. I felt myself go. How am I back?" Thorn's answer was barely a whisper. "I don't know, Lieutenant, but I'm damn glad you are." The architect's voice returned, warm now, almost paternal. "You turned your terror into a shield for strangers. You weaponized love and called it mercy. This is new." Thorn lifted his chin. "It's Tuesday for us." Laughter, ancient, vast, and strangely kind, rolled through every mind. Then the tone shifted, and the warmth cooled into something solemn. "Yet one among you carries poison in the heart, one who would sell the garden for a quieter nights." Every eye turned instinctively toward the delegate pods. Talvin felt ice crawl down his spine. From the shadows near the Makari delegation, a figure stepped forward, Ambassador Vexthal of the Terran Concordance, sleek carapace gleaming, mandibles twitching. Until now he had been silent, almost forgotten. Now its compound eyes reflected the architect's blue light like shattered sapphires. "I did what was necessary," Vexthal clicked, voice dripping contempt. "Humanity upsets 10,000 years of balance. Their empathy weapon could be turned on any of us. I fed the swarm your location to the swarm so the council would see the danger and destroy them before." Thorn's voice cut like a blade. "You murdered 43 of my people to prove a point. I preserved order," Vexthal spat. The architects were silent for a long moment. Then the monolith simply opened. Not a door, not a hatch. Space itself unfolded like paper, revealing a corridor of starlight leading into the heart of the ancient ship. Gravity shifted. Every delegate felt an irresistible pull toward that corridor, gentle but absolute. Talvin's feet left the floor. Around him, hundreds of beings floated upward in slow motion, robes and feathers and crystalline shards drifting like petals. Only Thorn and Vexthal remained on the chamber floor, held by some counter force. The voice spoke one last time, and this time it was for Thorn alone. "Captain of the Eidolon, bring the betrayer, walk with us. We would understand what humanity has become." Thorn looked up at the corridor of light, then back at his crew on the flickering bridge feed. 1,000 faces looked to him for orders, exhausted, resurrected, terrified, proud. He reached out and took Vexthal by one chitinous arm. The Terran struggled, mandibles clacking, but could not break the human's grip. "Looks like I'm going for a walk," Thorn said quietly. "Hold the fort. If I don't come back, tell Earth we made them proud." The Eidolon's executive officer, a woman with gray streaks in her braid and tears on her cheeks, snapped a perfect salute. "Aye, sir, we'll keep the light on." Thorn turned toward the corridor. For the first time, hesitation flickered across his face, just a heartbeat of fear, raw and deeply human. Then he squared his shoulders, the way men have done since they first stood upright on an African savanna and looked at the stars. Talvin, floating helplessly with the rest of the assembly, watched the captain of humanity stride into the light, dragging betrayal behind him like a broken toy. The corridor sealed. The ancient ship turned with impossible grace and accelerated toward the galactic core, carrying Elias Thorn and the fate of every species into a silence older than names. Talvin hung in zero gravity, tears still drying on his scales, and felt the universe inhale. He whispered the only prayer he could remember from childhood, the one his mates sang to their eggs when the nights were long. "Let the road rise to meet them. Let the stars keep them. Let whatever waits beyond the dark find them worthy." Far away, the Eidolon's running lights dimmed to a single white beacon burning against the night, patient, defiant, waiting for its captain to come home. And in the perfect stillness that followed, every soul in the assembly heard the same quiet thought brush their minds like a father's hand on a sleeping child's brow. "The children have grown brave. Now we will see if they have grown wise." Time lost meaning inside the corridor of starlight. Talvin floated with the rest of the assembly in the gentle grip of the architects, will, weightless, breathless, suspended between heartbeats. The chamber of the United Galactic Assembly had become a snow globe shaken by a god. Delegates drifted in slow spirals, robes billowing like jellyfish, eyes wide with the same animal terror and wonder. No one spoke. There was nothing left to say after a voice older than galaxies had borrowed your thoughts to finish its sentences. Only the main viewport still functioned. It showed the ancient monolith carrying Thorn and Vexthal away at velocities that turned stars into white streaks. The Eidolon followed at a respectful distance, a lone knight escorting its king into the dragon's lair. Every few seconds, the Titan pulsed a single tight beam message on all human frequencies. Still here, still yours, waiting. Talvin watched that pulse the way a drowning man watches a rope. He had never met Elias Thorn in the flesh, yet the captain's absence felt like a missing lung. The man had walked into the light carrying every doubt and hope humanity had ever nursed, and now the galaxy held its breath to see if he would walk back out. Hours passed, or days. There was no way to tell. Food dispensers remained frozen. No one was hungry anyway. The Lorani younglings eventually fell asleep curled inside their mothers' membranes. The Korvath ambassador sat in a puddle of its own luminescent secretions, muttering about the end of order. Talvin simply floated near the viewport and counted the Eidolon's heartbeat signal. 1,017 pulses, 1,018. On the 1,019th, the ancient ship stopped. It did not decelerate. It simply chose a point between galaxies where nothing had ever happened and decided that was where everything would. The stars themselves seemed to lean in. A new light blossomed from the monolith's heart, not blue this time, but gold, warm, the color of late afternoon on a world that remembers mercy. It widened into a circle wide enough to swallow suns, and from it stepped Elias Thorn, alone. He was barefoot, uniform jacket gone, white shirt torn at the shoulder and stained with something darker than blood. His face was gaunt, as though he had aged 10 years in a single afternoon, but his eyes burned with a clarity that hurt to witness. In his right hand he carried a small object, a seed or a stone or a star compressed into something that fit in a human palm. It pulsed gently, alive. Behind him the corridor folded shut like a flower at dusk. The monolith dimmed, its blue eyes closing one by one until only darkness remained where a god ship had been. Thorn did not speak at first. He simply looked out at the thousands of drifting delegates and offered the smallest, weariest smile Talvin had ever seen on a living creature. Then he raised the object in his hand. "This," he said, voice raw from screaming or singing or both, "is what they gave us." The seed stone star unfolded. Light poured out, not blinding but enveloping, the way dawn slips under a bedroom door when you are small and afraid of the dark. Every mind in the assembly received the same vision at once, a garden vast beyond comprehension, worlds hanging like fruit, some lush, some scorched, some still only possibility. And walking between the rows, gardeners of every shape, tending, pruning, weeping over the burned branches, rejoicing over new shoots. Among them now walked human figures in worn fleet jackets, sleeves rolled high, dirt under their nails and hope in their eyes. The vision narrowed to a single tree, ancient, lightning-scarred, roots deep in poisoned soil. From its broken trunk grew a single new branch, green and stubborn, heavy with impossible blossoms. The architect's voice, no longer vast but intimate, like a grandfather leaning close. "You feared you were weeds. You were wrong. You are the graft that saves the tree." The light folded back into Thorn's hand. He closed his fist gently around it, and when he opened it again the object was gone, absorbed into his skin like a promise kept. Only then did gravity return. Delegates settled to the floor in a rustle of robes and feathers and crystal chimes. Talvin landed on his feet, trembling. Thorn looked straight at the pickup that linked him to the Eidolon. "XO," he croaked, "tell the crew mission accomplished. And tell the chaplains to start writing new verses. We've got a bigger story now." A cheer exploded across the Titan's open channels, raw and ragged and joyous. 10,000 voices that had stared into extinction and been handed tomorrow instead. Thorn turned to the assembly. His voice, when it came, was quiet but carried to the back of every skull. "The architects are leaving. Not because we passed their test, because we changed the questions. They came to judge the harvest and found gardeners willing to burn their own hands to keep the fire away from the orchard. They gave us a choice. We could take their power, rule the garden, prune whatever we judged unworthy, or we could take responsibility for it." He lifted his hand, palm up. A faint golden glow pulsed beneath the skin, the same rhythm as the Eidolon's beacon. "We chose the second one, always will." Talvin felt tears again, hotter this time. He thought of his eggs waiting under Zethra's red sun, of every desperate prayer whispered in sandstorm nights, and understood at last what humanity's stubborn, ridiculous, impossible faith had always been pointed toward. Not conquest, gardening. The Chancellor found its voice. "Captain Thorn, what happens now?" Thorn's smile turned sharp, the old wolf waking up. Now we go home. There's a galaxy full of burned branches, and we've got work to do." He looked once more at the place where the architects had been, and for a moment almost shy. "Thank you," he said to the empty dark, "for trusting us with the shears." The darkness answered with silence so complete it felt like benediction. Then the Eidolon's engines flared, gentle this time, a lullaby instead of a war cry, and began the long turn toward Sol. Talvin watched the Titan pivot, scarred, resurrected, glowing faintly gold along its flanks like a promise etched in starlight. And for the first time in his life, he did not pray for deliverance. He prayed for strength to be worthy of the gardeners who had just saved them all. Far away, in the place beyond places where the architects waited, a single new star kindled where none had been before, small, steady, unmistakably human. It burned with the color of late afternoon on a world that had decided mercy was not weakness. And across the galaxy, children of every species looked up at their night skies and felt, for the first time, not alone. But somewhere deeper, in the quiet between heartbeats, Talvin heard one final whisper meant only for him. The harvest is not finished. The real work begins when the awe fades. He closed his 3 eyes, breathed in the recycled air of a station that would never feel the same again, and answered aloud to no one and everyone. The journey home began with silence. Not the silence of vacuum, but the deeper kind, the hush that falls after a funeral when the last prayer has been said, and the living must decide what to do with the rest of their lives. The Eidolon drifted at 1/10 burn, engines throttled so low they barely whispered. Every crew member who was not on essential watch stood at the observation blisters, staring back at the place where the architects had vanished. Some cried quietly. Others laughed in short, startled bursts, as though joy itself had become a foreign language. A few simply touched the golden vein now glowing faintly beneath the skin of their left hands and said nothing at all. Talvin had been granted temporary quarters aboard the Titan. Humanity, in its infuriating, generous way, refused to let any delegate return to their own ships until decompression protocols were complete. He suspected it was less about medical caution and more about not wanting anyone to be alone with what they had just witnessed. He stood now in the starboard memorial garden, a long greenhouse corridor that ran the length of the mid-deck. Real soil, real plants, olive trees from Terra, sand oaks from New Carthage, even a cluster of crimson dune grass from Zethra Prime that someone had smuggled aboard in a coffee tin. The air smelled of wet earth and rosemary and distant rain. Soft lights mimicked a Terran dusk. Somewhere, water trickled over stones. Captain Thorne found him there, barefoot still, shirt sleeves rolled high, the golden glow under his skin pulsing like a second, slower heartbeat. "Thought I'd find you with the plants," Thorne said. His voice was hoarse from whatever had happened inside the monolith, but the weariness had been replaced by something steadier. "Your people always did have a gift for growing things in places nothing should grow." Talvin's claws tightened around the railing. "My mate sent the dune grass. She said if humans could build a garden inside a warship, the least Zethra could do was contribute a weed." Thorne chuckled, low and warm. "We like weeds, they survive." They stood side by side in silence for a long time, watching fireflies, actual fireflies, genetically tweaked for 0G, drift between the olive branches. The insects carried tiny lanterns of bioluminescence, spelling out names in slow script across the dark. The 43 pilots who had died and come back, somehow impossibly, home. Talvin finally spoke. "What did it feel like, holding the shears?" Thorne considered. "Like holding my own heart outside my chest and realizing it was bigger than I thought. Like being asked to prune a tree whose roots are made of every child who will ever live." He flexed his glowing hand. "They didn't give us power, Talvin. They gave us consequence. Every choice we make from now on echoes in the garden. Forever." In's throat worked. "My people have a saying, the desert teaches patience because it knows the rain is coming. I never understood it until today." Thorne nodded. "We have one too. Grace is just love that learned how to fight. Turns out the architects like our version better than most." A soft chime sounded, 3 descending notes. Thorne touched the calm beat in his ear. "Go ahead, XO." The woman's voice, the same one that had saluted him into the light, answered. "Sir, long-range arrays are picking up distress clusters, 17 of them. Outer rim colonies, all species. Swarm remnants didn't scatter. They're regrouping, hitting soft targets. They're angry, like hornets whose nest got burned." Thorne closed his eyes. "Estimated civilian casualties if we do nothing. High 6 figures in the first week. Low 7 by the end of the month." Talvin felt the old fear crawl up his spine, the same fear that had lived in his bones since childhood raiders. But this time it came wrapped in something new, responsibility, vast and golden and terrible. Thorne opened his eyes. They were older now, ancient but unafraid. "Plot courses," he said. "All 17. We'll take the Eidolon herself to the worst 3. Spin up the foundry, start printing relief corvettes. Wake the chaplains, the medics, the gardeners, every soul who still has dirt under their nails. Tell them the harvest isn't done." He looked at Talvin. "Your colonies are on that list." In's heart stuttered. Zethra Prime, his mate, his eggs. Thorne offered his hand, palm up, the golden glow bright enough to read by. "Come with us, not as observer, as partner. Your people know deserts. We're about to turn a lot of them back into gardens." Talvin stared at the offered hand. He thought of every time he had prayed for deliverance and received only silence. He thought of the way humanity had answered silence with thunder and thunder with mercy. He placed his scaled palm against the warm human skin. The golden light flowed between them for a heartbeat, 2 species sharing the same promise. "Then let us go make the rain come," Talvin said. Alarms began to sing across the ship, gentle this time, a rising chorus instead of a warning. Crew members moved with purpose, not panic. Children's laughter echoed from the hydroponic decks where teachers were already explaining to wide-eyed younglings why the ship smelled like hope tonight. Thorne squeezed once, then let go. "First jump in 20 minutes. Better find a couch." Talvin followed him toward the bridge, claws clicking on deck plates that no longer felt foreign. As they walked, he passed crew members of every species now, humans greeting Zethran refugees, E3 pilots trading feathers for flight patches, even a Makari drone carrying a pot of Zethran dune grass like it was made of glass. On the main screen, the Eidolon's new course plotted itself in threads of gold, 17 stars burning red with distress, 17 gardens waiting to be saved. Thorn took the center chair. The golden glow spread from his hand up his arm, across his chest, until the entire bridge was bathed in soft afternoon light. He did not give orders, he simply opened his hand and the ship understood. The Titan turned its prow toward the dark, engines rising from whisper to him. Talvin stood at his side, no longer a guest, and watched stars blur into golden streaks. Behind them, the Memorial Garden's fireflies rearranged themselves into a new message, slow and deliberate. The gardeners are coming. Hold on. And somewhere far ahead, in 17 dying systems, people who had stopped believing in miracles looked up at their blood-red skies and saw a single new star kindling where none had been before. It was moving toward them. It was singing. And for the first time in recorded history, the void swarm knew what it felt like to be prey. But deeper still, in the quiet place where prayers are answered before they are spoken, Talvin heard the architect's final gift, not words this time, but a feeling vast and warm and ancient. You were afraid the universe was a graveyard. Watch us make it a cradle instead. The Eidolon leapt. 17 gardens waited. And the real work, the long, dirty, stubborn, glorious work of making burned things grow again, had only just begun. The first garden they saved was already on fire when they arrived. Zethra Prime hung in the viewscreen like a ruby cracked open and bleeding. Swarm biofleets had punched through the outer defenses 3 days earlier. Orbital stations drifted in pieces, trailing frozen air and bodies. On the night side, continent-wide scars glowed dull orange, acid storms eating through crust and memory alike. Talvin stood on the Eidolon's bridge and felt his legs forget how to hold him. His homeworld, his mate, his unhatched eggs. Thorn's hand settled a steady hand on his shoulder without looking away from the tactical sphere. We're late, he said quietly, but we're here. The Eidolon did not slow. It simply arrived, spacetime folding around it like silk. One moment it was a light hour out, the next it was inside the planet's gravity well, shields flaring gold as they kissed the upper atmosphere. 17,000 kilometers of warship cast a second dawn across the night side, and for the first time in 72 hours the swarm paused. They had never seen anything large enough to eclipse a sunrise. All hands, Thorn said, voice calm enough to shame the void itself. Operation Green Dawn, launch everything that flies, crawls, or prays. Gardeners first, guns second. We're not here to win a battle, we're here to start a spring. Bays opened along the Titan's flanks like petals. Out poured not just fighters, but seed ships painted soft green and white, but hospital frigates, atmospheric scrubbers, hydroponic arcs, and 1,000 smaller craft crewed by whoever had volunteered first. Cooks, chaplains, schoolteachers, musicians, anyone whose hands knew how to make things live instead of die. Talvin watched a converted or hauler disgorge an entire forest, saplings in shock gel, roots wrapped in prayer flags from a dozen worlds. They fell through the burning sky like green rain. Swarm interceptors rose to meet them. The Eidolon answered with mercy, not wrath. Golden lances of the empathy light speared downward, not to kill but to remind. Every swarm organism touched by the beam convulsed, remembering every world it had ever devoured, every scream it had ever silenced. Most simply died of grief. The rest turned and fled, trailing spores of confusion like tears. Talvin's claws dug into the railing until they scored metal. My family's burrow is under the ashen shelf, he rasped. If the acid front reached, Thorn was already moving. Angel Wing, you're with me. We're going down. They took a single dropship, Thorn, Talvin, and a squad of combat medics who sang hymns while checking rifles. The descent was a corridor of fire and smoke, the hull glowing cherry red. Talvin closed his eyes and did something he had not done since childhood. He prayed aloud, the old Zethran words for water, for shade, for eggs that had not yet seen sky. The dropship punched through the storm and landed in the ruins of Talvin's childhood city. Ash drifted like black snow. The air tasted of acid and endings. But in the central plaza, beneath a half-collapsed dome, a circle of Zethran survivors stood back to back around a makeshift incubator. In its center, glowing faintly under emergency lights, lay 6 perfect eggs. Talvin's mate, Kalia, stood guard with a mining laser in one claw and her grandmother's prayer staff in the other. Her scales were scorched, one eye swollen shut, but when she saw Talvin, she dropped both weapons and ran. He met her halfway, folding her into his arms while the eggs pulsed softly between them, alive, untouched, waiting. Behind them, Thorn's medics were already unpacking portable atmospheric processors. Human gardeners in exosuits knelt in the ash, pressing seeds into soil that still smoked, whispering to them like children. One looked up, soot-streaked and grinning. Captain, this dirt's angry, but it's honest. Give us 6 months and we'll have wheat singing here again. Thorn's laugh cracked in the middle half-sob. You've got 4. Above them, the sky began to clear, not by miracle but by stubborn engineering. Eidolon's scrubber wings unfolded like vast silver petals, drinking poison and breathing out rain. The first drops that fell on Talvin's face were clean. Kalia touched the golden glow beneath Thorn's skin, wonder overtaking exhaustion. You brought the rain. Thorn shook his head. We just remembered how to ask for it. They stayed on Zethra for 39 days. 39 days of hauling refugees, of singing over fresh graves and fresher seedlings, of children, human, Zethran, Ethery, even a dozen others, learning each other's lullabies while planting trees whose roots would one day hold the soil together when memory tried to blow it away. On the 39th night, Talvin stood with Thorn and Kalia on a hill that had been bare stone that morning and was now carpeted in pale green. The 6 eggs had hatched 2 days earlier. The hatchlings slept curled against their mother's side, tiny claws clutching tufts of new grass. Overhead, the Eidolon hung low, no longer a warship but a skyborne city of light. Its gardens were open to vacuum now, blooming impossible flowers that drank starlight and cast soft gold across the reborn continent. Thorn spoke without looking away from the stars. 16 more systems to go, some worse than this one, some quieter. Places where the swarm already finished its meal and left only bones. Talvin's voice was steady for the first time since the assembly. Then we will teach the bones how to sing again. Kalia leaned her head against his shoulder, exhausted and fierce. And if the architects are watching, Thorn smiled, small and tired and cert. Let them watch, we're just getting started. Far above, the golden veins beneath 10,000 human palms pulsed in perfect unison, a second heartbeat for an entire ship. The Eidolon turned its prow once more toward the dark, engines rising from lullaby to marching cadence. Talvin lifted his newborn daughter, scales still soft, eyes already the color of deep desert sky, and showed her the Titan. That, he told her, is what hope looks like when it decides to fight. The child cooed and reached one tiny claw toward the light. In the memorial garden aboard ship, the fireflies rearranged themselves one last time. This time they spelled no names, only a single sentence that drifted slowly across the olive branches for every gardener to read. The desert and the ocean have learned the same song. Now we will teach the stars. Somewhere beyond the galactic rim, 17 gardens waited, some already green, some still smoking, 1 or 2 only ash and memory. The Eidolon leapt toward the next one, carrying water, seed, and a promise older than language. We were afraid once. Watch what we do with the fear now. And in the quiet place where the architects listened, a vast and ancient satisfaction stirred, the slow turning of a gardener who sees the burned branch leaf out after all. The harvest was safe. The planting had only just begun. But on the night side of Zethra Prime, in the cradle of new grass, Talvin felt one final whisper settle into his bones like rain into parched soil. When the awe fades, when the golden light dims, when the last swarm is only a story we tell children to make them brave, remember this. The real miracle was never the ship. It was the hands willing to get dirty. Talvin looked at his daughter's sleeping face, at his mate's steady breathing, at the human captain standing watch beside them with soot on his sleeves and starlight in his eyes. He smiled, small and fierce and cert. Then let the dirt stay under our claws forever, he said to the night. The stars answered with rain. 6 years later, the Eidolon no longer looked like a warship. From a distance it resembled a continent of living green drifting through the dark, forests climbing its spine, rivers of recycled water threading silver between orchards, clouds of actual clouds drifting inside transparent atmospheric domes that capped the former weapon bays. The golden veins that had once been emergency lighting now glowed steady and soft, like late afternoon sunlight filtered through leaves. Children of 30 species played tag along the outer hull, riding magnetic boots and laughing in languages that had never shared a sky before. Talvin watched them from the observation ring that used to be a torpedo magazine. He was older now, scales dulled to deep jade, left arm scarred from a swarm queen's dying claw, right hand permanently streaked with soil that would never quite wash out. Beside him stood his eldest daughter, a Shavin, 16 cycles, tall and fearless, wearing the green and gold patch of the garden fleet on her shoulder. She had her mother's eyes and her father's stubborn refusal to believe anything was impossible. They're calling it the Long Bloom, she said, nodding toward the ship. 17 systems fully restored, 42 more showing green on the chlorophyll index. The swarm hasn't been seen in 3 years. Talvin's chest rose and fell in the slow rhythm he had learned from humans. Breathe like you have time, like tomorrow is promised. Numbers, he said softly. Tell me the stories the numbers hide. Ashavin grinned, the same crooked smile Kalia wore when she was about to win an argument. On Vyarth, for the Makari Collective built an entire city out of recycled swarm carapace. They call it Penance Spire. The Corveth ambassador still can't look at it without crying. New Carthage, they planted an olive tree for every life lost in the first wave. The grove is 30 kilometers wide now. Pilgrims come from 3 sectors just to sit in its shade. She paused, then quieter. And on Zethra, the dune grass you brought aboard in a coffee tins has taken over half the southern continent. They renamed the Ashen Shelf the Verdant Shelf. Mom says the sand sings when the wind moves through it. Talvin closed his eyes. He could almost hear it. Footsteps approached, human, unhurried. Captain Elias Thorne, gray now at the temples, uniform jacket long since replaced by a simple gardener's coat of undyed linen, sleeves rolled high enough to show the golden glow had spread to both arms and across his chest like ivy. He carried a small wooden box under one arm and the same tired, certain smile he had worn the day he walked into the light. "Thought I'd find you two here," he said. "We're about to make the last jump." Talvin turned. "The last," Thorne set the box on the railing. Inside lay a single seed, no larger than a child's tooth, shimmering with every color that had ever been named and a few that hadn't. "The architects left us one more gift," he said. "A seed from the first tree, the one that stood at the center of the garden before there were gardeners. They said when we were ready, when we had proven the graft would hold, we should plant it." Ashavin's breath caught. "Where?" Thorne's smile turned almost shy. "Where it all began, Harmonia, the assembly platform. They want the galaxy to see what happens when fear learns how to grow things." Talvin felt the old ache, the one that lived behind his ribs whenever he remembered the day the stars themselves leaned in to listen. "And after we plant it," "After?" Thorne shrugged. "We go home, real home. Earth wants her ship back for a while. There's a desert on Mars that's been waiting 10,000 years for rain." He looked out at the Eidolon, no, at the Ark, because that was the name the children had given her, and no one had the heart to correct them. "She's done her tour as a warship," he said. "Time to let her finish her life as a promise." Talvin studied the man who had become brother, co-gardener, co-miracle. "You're retiring the Eidolon," Thorne laughed, the sound of wind through new leaves. "Retiring? No, reassigning. She's going to spend the next 1,000 years ferrying seeds and children and stubborn fools who still believe dead worlds can learn how to dream again. Same crew, same mission, just quieter weapons." A soft chime sounded across the observation ring. 5 minutes to jump. Ashavin hugged her father fiercely, then Thorne, then ran off to join the other younglings gathering at the forward viewports. Talvin and Thorne remained, two old soldiers turned farmers, watching the stars prepare to fold. "Tell me the truth, Elias," Talvin said. "Do you ever miss it? The thunder, the certainty of something to shoot at?" Thorne was quiet a long time. "Every day," he admitted. "But then I walk through the olive grove and hear a Makari child reciting poetry to a tree that shouldn't exist, and the thunder feels small." He opened the wooden box again and lifted the seed between thumb and forefinger. It caught the starlight and held it. "They told me something at the end, inside the light, the architects. They said the universe wasn't created perfect. It was created pregnant. Every cruelty, every empty place, every burned garden was a womb waiting for someone brave enough to bleed in it." Talvin felt tears threaten, the easy tears of an old man who had seen too many miracles to pretend he was unmoved. Thorne pressed the seed into Talvin's palm. "You should do the planting. Your people knew deserts first. You'll understand what the rain means." Talvin closed his claws around the impossible thing and felt it pulse once like a second heart. The jump klaxon sounded, gentle, almost a lullaby. The Ark, once Eidolon, once terror of the void, now cradle of the long bloom, turned her vast green flank toward the Harmonia system and began the final leap. Behind her, 17 restored worlds spun in their new orbits, heavy with fruit and memory. Ahead, the assembly platform waited, rebuilt, its crystalline dome replaced by living wood and glass, already prepared with a circle of soil taken from every garden humanity had ever brought back to life. Talvin stood at the viewport as the stars blurred into gold. He thought of fireflies spelling messages across olive branches. He thought of 43 pilots who came home laughing. He thought of acid rain turning clean on his tongue the day his daughter took her first breath under a human-made sky. And he whispered the only prayer left that still felt large enough. "Thank you for the dirt. Thank you for the hands. Thank you for letting us stay." The Ark slipped into fold space, carrying the last seed of the first tree toward the place where the galaxy had once learned to fear humanity and would now learn something entirely different. In the memorial garden, the fireflies gathered one final time. They did not spell words. They simply formed the shape of an open hand, palm up, offering. Across every restored world, people of every shape looked up at the same moment and felt the same quiet certainty settle into their bones. The war is over. The planting will never end. And somewhere in the place beyond places where architects listen, a vast and ancient joy stirred, the slow smile of a gardener who had waited 10 billion years for someone to finally understand the difference between conquest and care. The Ark emerged above Harmonia. The circle of soil waited. Talvin stepped forward, seed in hand, and knelt. Behind him, 10,000 gardeners, human and not young and old, once enemies, now family, stood in perfect silence. He pressed the seed into the earth. Nothing dramatic happened. No pillar of light, no choir of angels, just soil and water, and the patient, stubborn, ridiculous faith that something dead can still learn how to grow. But 6 hours later, when the first pale shoot broke the surface, every child on the platform swore they heard singing. And somewhere very far away, a new star kindled, small and steady, and the color of late afternoon on a world that had decided mercy was the only victory worth winning. The gardeners went home. The work continued. The universe, pregnant no longer, took its first full breath and discovered it sounded like laughter. 111 years after the day the Eidolon first cast its shadow across the assembly, the Ark returned to Sol. She came in slow, engines dimmed to a whisper, green continents of forest glowing against the night side like emeralds set in black velvet. Mars hung red and waiting below her, its great equatorial desert scarred by ancient rivers that had never known water. The children aboard, great-grandchildren of the original crew, born under alien suns, pressed their faces to the viewports and gasped at the sight of the old stories had promised. A blue-white marble cradled in the dark, banded by rings of orbital gardens that had not existed when their ancestors left. Talvin was there to meet her. He was very old now, scales gone the color of sun-bleached jade, gait slow, but his eyes were still bright. He stood on the observation deck of Tycho Memorial Station, leaning on the carved staff his daughter Ashavin had made from the first tree grown on the verdant shelf. Beside him stood Captain Myra Thorne, Elias' granddaughter, wearing the same plain linen coat her grandfather had favored, sleeves rolled high, golden veins long since faded into ordinary human skin. The gift had been spent, passed on, woven into soil and story and song until no single person carried it alone. The Ark did not dock. She simply opened every garden bay and let the wind of her passage carry seeds across the Martian sky. Olive, dune grass, iron oak, star apple, 1,000 species rescued from 1,000 dying worlds. They fell like slow silver rain, parachutes of spider silk catching the thin sunlight, drifting toward the waiting red dust. Myra's voice was soft. He asked that his ashes be scattered with the first planting. Talvin nodded. He had known this day was coming since the quiet message arrived 6 months earlier, handwritten on paper, the way Elias always insisted important things should be delivered. I'm tired, old friend. The gardens are in good hands. Tell the kids to make Mars laugh. I'll be listening from the roots. The urn was small, carved from olive wood taken from the memorial grove aboard ship. Myra opened it. Inside lay fine gray ash mixed with something that caught the light, tiny flecks of gold, all that remained of the architect's gift after a lifetime spent giving it away. Talvin took a handful. The wind took it gently, carrying it out through the open bay, out over the desert where the first seeds were already touching soil. They did not speak for a long time. Below them the red dust stirred. Green threads appeared, delicate as hope, spreading in perfect circles around each fallen seeds. Atmosphere processors hummed to life, old machines waking to purpose they had waited 10,000 years to fulfill. Within hours, the first shoots became saplings. Within days, the saplings became forest. Within weeks, the desert wore a mantle of living emerald that could be seen from orbit. Myra finally broke the silence. He used to say the real miracle wasn't bringing the dead back. It was teaching the living how to stay. Talvin smiled, the expression of a man who has outlived every fear he ever owned. Your grandfather never understood how loud his quiet was. From the Ark came music, not recorded, but live, 10,000 voices of every species raised in the old Terran hymn Elias had loved, the one he claimed his grandmother sang while planting tomatoes during Earth's darkest century. The melody drifted across the widening green, soft, stubborn, ridiculous, unstoppable. Myra slipped her hand into Talvin's scaled one. Together they watched the desert bloom. Years later, travelers coming to the Sol system for the first time would see Mars transformed, a second living world wrapped in forest and river and laughter. At its equator stood a single tree taller than any mountain, its trunk braided from every species the garden fleet had ever carried. Its roots drank from aquifers coaxed back to life by human stubbornness and alien faith. Its branches held orchards, playgrounds, schools, shrines. At its heart, carved into living wood, were 2 sets of names. Elias Thorne Talvin of Zethra underneath, in 100 languages, a single line, they were afraid once. They planted anyway. Children of every shape climbed those branches and never learned the word impossible. And on certain evenings, when the twin suns, Sol and the small artificial star kindled by the architects, set together in a sky the color of late afternoon, the wind through the leaves sounded exactly like an old man laughing. Somewhere very far away, in the place beyond places where gardeners rest, 2 voices, one rough with Terran tobacco, one dry with Zethran dust, could be heard sharing a drink and listening to the roots grow. Think we did all right? Elias asked. Talvin. The answer came back warm, content, eternal. Look at the children, old friend. They don't even know how to spell fear anymore. Above them, the first tree spread its arms wide enough to cradle a world, and every leaf carried the same quiet message the fireflies had once spelled across olive branches long ago. The war is over. The planting will never end. Thank you for the dirt. Thank you for the hands. And the universe, no longer pregnant with sorrow, breathed out a sigh that sounded like laughter across 1,000 thriving gardens and kept growing. Because that is what gardens do. Because that is what gardeners do. Because once, a very long time ago, a single terrified species looked at a burning galaxy and decided mercy was the only victory worth winning, and they were thorough.